All right, Perps, we are live. Kind of give everybody a second to get situated and guys to show up. But Jason, how's your day been, brother?
So far, so good. Did some writing today. We're working on a Sergeant Thor novel right now, so that's comes and goes in spots with that kind of thing. Sometimes you're into it and you just can't get pulled away. Other times, the
Yeah,
slightest distraction, and I've had both of those today. But yeah, the slightest distraction, you're just like, hey, what's on Twitter? You know.
yeah, man. I was going to ask you later on, but what's your typical writing day like?
It really depends on what's going on with Wargate with the publisher, because there's going to be
Yeah,
days where I just have other things I have to do. I have to take calls with printers or with audiobook publishers, narrators, things like that. So on a good writing day, I'll get up and I'll just hammer it out. Start 7:30, and then the next thing I know, it's almost noon, and I'm like, oh, I better go see the family, like kids that have gotten up and I haven't seen them all day long, that kind of thing. So on those days, it's great, and then you go back in for a second round when you kind of get your wind and after workout. Sometimes if I'm close to the end of a book, I just finished a book. You'll be sneaking back down at 10 o'clock at night, and everyone it varies, but those are the productive days.
that's how do you handle your non-productive days where you just can't? You feel like you can't get your head in the game?
Um, if I really can't do it, so like if I really can't do it, I'll just call it and I'll say, okay, what's something constructive I can do?
Yeah,
What can I do that's actually pushing the ball forward a little bit? If I have too many of those, then usually I just break things up. So I'll say, okay, I'm going to grab the pen and paper, and I'm going to go to a coffee shop and leave my phone at home and
yeah,
just sit there. And usually that's enough to kind of break through whatever's holding me back.
that's slick. But anyway, let me introduce you now. We got some people building up. So, guys, this is Jason Anspach, the CEO of Wargate Books. You guys have heard me talk about a couple of his books in streams because his books are where I go to gain my sanity back after we do all the stuff that we do on this channel. I'm serious, dude. We'll watch entire congressional hearings on this channel, and you,
Oh,
you kind of fill up. You got to go somewhere. So your books are where
yeah,
I run to. Um,
yeah. I'll wear you down.
but anyway, Jason Osbach, he is the award-winning writer, Galaxy's Edge. Um, what is it? Doomsday Recon now is one of the other series.
Yeah, yeah, that's
Forgotten
one.
Ruin is another one of my absolutely favorite books.
Yeah, thank you.
And just an all around, I mean, kick ass. It sounds like you, after hearing the other writers and you and some of the after action reports, it sounds like you guys at Wargate are, I mean, on top of it, especially with all the writing you do, man. You guys are
Mhm.
pumping stuff out there.
Right. Yeah. Well, Nick Cole, who's my co-writer on Galaxy's
Yeah,
Edge and Forgotten Ruin, and he's the co-owner of Wargate as well. He came up with an expression that we use quite a bit, which is work the rifle. At the end of the day, like we're there in the pit, and our job is to work that rifle and keep working it. So everything else that we've done has come out of that, like as a secondary thing. So
yeah,
for the initial part, it was just writing, writing, writing. But you do it long enough, you start to see what makes it work. You start to see, well, here's how you find and speak to artists. Here's how you publish books. Here's how you market them. This is why an audiobook works. This is why it doesn't work.
yeah.
Um, and so as people came to us and were like, we wish you would write more books, we kind of felt like we were at the limit of what we could do, which is still a lot. We write all the time. And so that's what made us say, well, we know how to do this. Why don't we find other people like Mark Sibley, Blaine Pardo, Peter Nealon, Doc Spears, guys that are good writers in their own right, and just say, okay, you can't have a book from us every week, but we think we can give you a couple books a month from some other really solid writers, and that's what happened with Wargate.
Oh man, it's outstanding. Also, fun facts about Jason, guys. He's got 7 kids.
Yeah, we're
Um,
throwbacks.
his wife is an absolute saint.
Yeah, she's good. She's she's good. She's got 7 kids. She can probably still fit into her cheerleading outfit from college and high school if she wanted to. She's just like this amazing, absolute freak of nature in the best way possible. I'm saying that in the
That's
best way
awesome.
possible. So she was one of those ladies that from day one, she knew she wanted to be a mom. She wanted to have a family. And, growing up, that wasn't necessarily acceptable. Like, one for me, one for you. Thank the Lord we're
Yeah.
through was kind of how it went for us. But, started having kids. She's like, this is all I want. This is all I want to do. It's all I've ever wanted to do. And we just never got this sense of like, all right, we're done. We've met all the people that God has for us to meet in our life. And so we just kept having them. And then before we know it, I've got gray hair. We've got 7 kids, and the rest is history. Wouldn't change it though.
And I hear you are unmatched in arm wrestling with the family. I hear you win
Yeah,
everything.
it's that's absolutely the case. The youngest is 7, so she's pretty easy. The older ones though, they're getting into 18, 20. Thankfully, they have their mom's kind of like lean, slender build, and
Yeah.
I'm the stockier guy, so I can still I have to get in the gym, because they've got that natural raw, young man strength. But I'm developing the old man strength pretty well here now. So I think I can go well into my 50s, if not my 60s at this point.
Well, hopefully you keep going. But Kentucky Squirrel, another guy I go back and forth with on X all the time about
He's a
you
great
guys'
guy.
books and stuff, is an outstanding guy. Let me see if I can find his question real fast. Uh, he said Jason is an absolute legend. He said, ask him about the army of gnomes he keeps hyped up on Moon God Potion. That's the only way he can keep pumping out all of those books.
Yeah. Yeah. That's basically how we do it. We've got a bunch of when we, here I live in Washington State,
Mhm.
which despite some of its political problems, there are a lot of gnomes and woodland creatures. And so when we saw that we had a village in the yard, I just captured those guys and put them to work. I'm kind of like Gargamel with the Smurfs, but it's worked out pretty well, and they don't complain. They all the beer they can drink.
Man, you just got to keep feeding them that Moon God Potion, man. Apparently they
Yeah,
keep
that's all it
plugging along.
is. I mean, they can't get Moon God Potion on their own. So where else? What else are they going to do? Where else are they going to go?
Oh, and I've read in your bio, man, you grew up in a military family,
Mhm.
pretty much around the same time I was.
Okay.
So my dad served 26 years in.
Okay. Yeah.
So matter of fact, Fort Lewis, Washington was the only place we spent more than about 2 years in. We spent 4 years up on Fort Lewis.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Um,
So but you guys were bouncing around then.
yeah, dude, we bounced everywhere.
Yeah.
Were you guys pretty stable growing up, or was it kind of bouncing around, or?
We were stable because my parents got divorced, right? So like
Uh,
that shook us out of the army moving. Prior to that, it was like Italy, Germany, Maryland, Texas, Washington. It was all over the place. But
yeah.
my mom had family here in this state, and so that's where we settled down. But otherwise, it was the usual experience before that.
But what was it like? I mean, for you growing up, I mean, obviously you're a writer, you're very creative.
Mhm.
When you were younger growing up, what were you into and what kind of directed you towards writing?
So I was like that. I was an unsupervised kid, right? Like my mom had to work, so I was
Yeah.
unsupervised. Um, but I was also kind of into reading, and we had HBO, which was a really bad combination for like an 8-year-old kid.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so my mom really liked movies, and we would watch, movies all the time that you can probably take a kid to. Like we went and saw Top Gun like 4 weeks in a row, like in 1986. And
Oh,
I was
that's
pretty young
awesome.
at that point. My mom would like cover my eyes during the love scene. Um, but I just really got into movies, and I watched movies way too much, watched movies I shouldn't have been watching. But for whatever reason, it put me on this path to really think about why is one story compelling and why is one not. And so then
Yeah.
that leads to you kind of look for that. Well, why is this book compelling? Why is this not? And so it kind of progressed into a natural interest in storytelling, whether it was comic books or novels or movies. And so then I was like, well, hey, I think I want to write like screenplays. When I turn 18, I'll move to Hollywood or something like that. I ended up going to college and was like a theater and film major. But I met my wife, and that totally derailed that plan because you can't, when you're 20 years old, go to a girl's dad and be like, I want to marry your daughter. Don't worry, I'm a theater major. Like that just doesn't fly. So
Yeah.
I switched to public relations and journalism real quick, and but that helped too because then it helped me kind of get a more concise writing style and not fall into the trap of being too wordy.
Yeah. What kind of work were you doing before you? Because you're full time writing now, I
Yeah,
assume.
yeah. Now I'm doing
Um,
full time writing.
what were
I think
what were some of your
it's like
jobs
this path
before
that
then?
most of us have, right? Like, so if we're around the same age, I graduated college like 2001, 2002, right around there.
Yeah.
So 9/11 just happened. The economy's bad, and everyone's just taking work where they can take it, right? Like everyone's just taking a job where they can take it. So I was like, oh, I'm working at a restaurant. I'm responsible, so I guess I'll be a restaurant manager because it pays more. So I do stuff like that, and then I got like a job, kind of a corporate job, and was working for a trucking company, and was only in the union for a little bit before I got into management. And then I was, it's like I'm a journalism major, but I'm doing like pricing analysis, like I'm doing spreadsheets and stuff like
Yeah.
that. And so I did that for a while, but it was like that itch to be creative was still there, and it was really driving me nuts. And you can kind of get a little bit of that out by playing video games or something like
Yeah.
that. Like, but it's not quite the same as doing it yourself. And so then I just decided one day, hey, I'm going to write a book. Just said, hey, I'm going to write a book. So I wrote one, and it made enough money to earn back its initial investment because I did the independent route. Then wrote a couple more, and then my fourth book was Legionnaire, which is the first book in Galaxy's Edge,
Yep.
and that was just a bona fide bestseller. And so then
Uh,
it was just a matter of like off to the races. And um, a couple years into that, we reached that point where we were saying, probably it's like a leap of faith, but there's an opportunity here just to write full time, but we've got to kind of take it now. And
yeah.
so we did, and God's been gracious and faithful, and it's really worked out well. So I'm keenly aware that I have a dream job, and so I try not to screw that up.
Well, I mean, you work hard at it too. That's the thing. You put the effort into it. You can tell it in the writing. I mainly listen to audiobooks because I
Hmm.
can listen to them all day when I'm doing other stuff, working on guns,
Hmm.
um, at work, welding and things like that.
Hmm.
And you can tell how much you put into these books and how much Nick puts in, and
Hmm.
how well you two mesh with writing. Um,
Thank you.
that is there. I ask this: is there a character that you love, that you just absolutely love to write? Do you have a group of them, and then Nick's got a group of them?
Yeah, I think so. I tend to write. My favorite characters are characters that have an aspect of my personality that I
Yeah.
would be foolish to let take over, right? Like I would burn a lot of bridges, like a lot of busted relationships, just not be in a good place. But it's fun to let them go. So like um characters that are kind of my creation and my personality would be like Brody from Wayward Galaxy is one. Um,
Yeah.
Captain Keel and Masters from Galaxy's Edge, those are both, that's me without a filter. Masters is me without a filter and without checks and balances. That's kind of like what I tried to make myself into being in high school. Like just
Yeah.
that kind of irreverent, just go. I was nowhere near as good looking as Masters though, so that's
Nah,
But if you're
Masters,
writing, you
man.
get to you get to control all that. So usually it's things like that, right? Uh, when we do characters, it's usually taking a personality trait. Sometimes it's one that you have innately, which I think allows you to write the character in a way that is realistic.
Yeah.
Sometimes maybe it's a character trait that you feel like you lack, but you say, but this guy's not going to have that weakness. This
Yeah.
guy's not going to be that way. So I think every single one has a little bit of us. Goth Solus, like, is a villain, but also a person that's willing to do whatever it takes,
Yeah.
um, in so much as he sees it as the right thing. I think we all can relate to that. We can all have those sort of fantasies of, well, if I stop caring, maybe it would go like this, that kind of a thing.
It very well could.
Hmm.
But another buddy of mine, matter of fact, the guy who got me hooked on y'all's books,
Hmm.
he stopped by the shop today and we talked for a second. And he
Oh
wanted
man,
to
tell him
ask
thank you next time.
he wanted to ask how much of Han Solo did you kind of write into Keel?
It was a lot. I mean, when we had the idea for Galaxy's Edge, we've told this story before, but I had written like a a pretty safe series because I was just feeling out and trying to see, can I even write? So it's
Yeah.
very different from the rest of my stuff. And I think people that have found me through Galaxy's Edge or any of the other books, if they go back to that first series, they're like, well, this is weird. Like, you know, this isn't what I was expecting. But Nick had asked me, we had become friends, and he had asked me, well, you know, if you could write anything you want, because I knew that series was done, what would it be? And I was like, well, I would write a Star Wars novel, but they'd never asked me to write a Star Wars novel for a variety of
No.
reasons, you know, one of which was like, who am I? And so he was like, oh, well, you should just write Star Wars. And I was like, well, you can't just, you know, write fan fiction. I don't want to do that. He's like, no. You can write what makes Star Wars great, but not ruin it. And I was like, oh, okay. So that got us working on Galactic Outlaws. And we split that up with Nick writing the Tyrus Rex sections and the Prisma and KRS 88 sections. And I wrote the Keel and Robbie sections. And so I didn't intentionally go and say, okay, I'm going to do this. But I was such a big Star Wars fan that, you know, Han Solo is, like, he's in the hard drive. He's in all of our hard drives. He's part of kind of our shared modern mythology at this point. So I said, well, let me start with him as a baseline, but I don't want him to lose that edge that he had in the first Star Wars movie, where he really was kind of in for himself. Like, I don't want him to lose that right away and say, okay, you got me. I'm a good guy. I'm selfless. I really want him to keep doing things for himself for a long time. And I think that worked out pretty well before the story dictated that now he's got to get back into the bigger picture. But that was the big thing. It's like, let me explore a Han Solo character that doesn't fall in love with a princess who tries to make him into an idealist.
And that character is done so well. I mean, and the play in between Keel and a lot of people's done good, but the play in between him and Ravi is just, some of that's just hysterical.
Yeah, thank you.
The way Ravi handles him, it's just
yeah. And I mean, like, it's cheesy, but like when I'm writing it, I have to find it funny myself. Like, that's like, as I write that scene, I'm like, well, I think this is funny, and this makes me laugh. This is what I would want to see in a movie. So hopefully it translates, but
it does very, very well. And I've told a lot of people about Galaxy's Edge, and I describe it all the time. It's Star Wars, but with balls. It's not this watered down thing. And the characters are so well written and their interactions are so good. I mean, they're addictive. Absolutely addictive.
Yeah, it's been a fun series to write. And as Nick and I kind of are reaching the end of where we're gonna take that main storyline with those main characters and kind of give the Galaxy a full three-act series and leave it there, and then just allow it to breathe a little bit. Right. Essentially, we're just going to go to our fan base, our dedicated readers, and say, all right, what do you want to know more about? And that's, we're just going to start taking orders. What character,
all.
what story, what do you want? And then that's what we'll do kind of each year.
Kill Team Ice.
I hear that. Yeah.
you gotta hear that a lot.
We do. But I mean, that just means that we'll listen. That's why we wrote Savage Wars, the Savage Wars trilogy. We had asked,
awesome books.
When we were getting towards the end of the first season of books, we said, okay, we're planning some other stuff. And we laid out, what do you want? We laid out a poll, and the number one winner was, we want to know what the Savage Wars were about. So that's when we went and wrote that trilogy that Stephen Lang narrated. And but that was just an idea, like, but it was because all the readers said that's what we want next. So we'll just start doing that.
Kentucky Squirrel says the Senasian conflict.
Oh yeah.
Which is another one that would be awesome.
Yeah, it's the amazing thing about that series is you really could spend the rest of your life writing stories in it. And what I want to see, and I think Nick wants to see this too, but as we kind of get older and do different projects and things, I know that there's some young guys that have at this point grown up with those being their influential foundational books. And I would love for those guys, as they become good writers, to be able to come in and say, all right, now I'm going to kind of pick up the torch and keep this going. and write some new stories and give it a new edge. And that would be great. I hope that we can do that because there's plenty of material to plumb.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and you still got Death Destroyer Worlds and a samurai mech running around somewhere.
Yeah, yeah,
and we are desperately wanting to see what he's doing because he's a little psycho.
yeah. That's another huge fun character. Yeah, I really enjoy writing him.
He is absolutely hysterical.
Mhm.
Um, and for guys who've never listened to the books or never read the books, think of a psycho version of R2D2 toting a pistol, and that's pretty
Right,
much Death Destroyer Worlds. He's
right.
a
Yeah. No, that's one of the things we loved about that arc was the different level of responsibility and pragmatism between Tyrus Rex and Captain Keel. With Tyrus Rex, when he had his time with that bot, kind of keeping him on a leash and being like
yeah,
no, and Captain Keel being like, well, sure, why not, just
yeah.
go for
Why
it.
not? Here's a gun.
Let him off the chain.
And he let him off the chain. Matter of fact, one of the jokes. Oh God, it's been months and months ago. We were joking, I think, with either you or Nick, and we're talking about the KTF ME and talking
Yeah.
about masters running around with Death Destroyer Worlds. And one of
Mhm.
the jokes I made was they could both talk about who nailed Honey the best.
Yeah. Yes. I remember that joke. Yeah, that was a good one. That was absolutely a good one.
I couldn't help it because that's just hysterical. And Master's character is so good. Which all the characters in the books are outstanding, and very well written. Um, it's just an absolute blast to listen to the books, or I'm sure guys are the same with reading the books. It's just they're I mean they're awesome. They're outstanding. Try not to
Great. I'm so glad
fangirl
you
too
like it.
much on you.
No, I appreciate it. I appreciate that you like it. I mean, that's why, like I say, this is a dream job because you have the opportunity to be creative and be entertaining. And there, what are the odds that we would be talking to each other if not for something like this? And
Yeah,
that's what I find so fascinating is how this has opened up avenues to meet and talk to people who really are often on the same wavelength as far as what they find entertaining, what they find tragic, noble, funny. And it's just because you just sit alone for a while and write a book and put it out there, and then the next thing you know, it's just these people gather, and you'd never meet them otherwise. But you're glad that you do.
oh man, and you guys are so good with like your after action reports, getting with fans, and then of course coming on here.
Oh,
And
sure.
I just well, I was a little deep into re-listening to the series when I hit you up that night and was like, I got to see whether I can talk to him.
Yeah.
I can't remember which book I was on then. Uh, now I'm right before, um, or right at when. Where is it exactly? Oh, when they're looking for masters. They're about to take off and go after them. Matter of fact, they've hit the swamp. So
Okay.
you've got McRaven talking to Butcher.
Mhm.
I think the last thing I heard was them dealing with the hole in the dog.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
With
Yeah. Yeah. They're in season 2. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Mhm. Don't feel bad. I get those mixed up too. That was an intense, like, a lot of those were being written during COVID. That, like, I can keep the first season really straight. I can keep all the spin-offs really straight, but for some reason with season 2, and I think part of it is because we wrote so much for season 2
yeah.
that we had to leave out because RC Break could only record a certain number of studio hours, and so we had to give kind of like abridged versions of the books, and we're still trying to figure out a solution for that. And but at any rate, like, so it's, yeah, I'm right there with you. I'm like, yeah, I know that happened, but I couldn't tell you if that happened in this book or that book.
Yeah.
And it's, I don't know.
I've I've spent so much time listening to him. Sometimes I got to think about exactly where I'm at.
Right.
Um, who was the deciding factor on McRaven? I got to send my congressman a dirty letter and put y'all's name in it.
Oh yeah, yeah. Who did that with McRaven? I usually blame all the deaths on Nick.
Yeah,
And most of them are his fault. McRaven was my fault though. And part of that, part of that, I guess we were thinking in terms of if you move on from this and everything stabilizes, what do you do with a guy like McRaven? right?
Yeah.
What do you do with that guy? Because that guy can't go back to regular Legion.
No.
And we thought, well, McRaven probably knows that too, and he's going to go out and he's going to make choices, and he's going to be fighting like this is the end, and so that's kind of that's kind of the thought process there.
Yeah, I mean, plus in his character had already been through so much with the G. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, had already been through the Death of a Thousand Cuts and
Mm-hmm.
everything with him.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a great ending for his character, but man, it killed me. I hated losing him.
Yeah, I was going to ask. Yeah, that's often interesting. Like, what's the hardest loss? A lot of people say Owens.
Yeah, Owens
Um,
was rough.
yeah, but yeah, I think everyone kind of has their personal character they identify with and they hate to see go. But like we say, you know what? That's also the reality. Like a lot
Yeah,
of really good guys didn't get to go home, and so as much as we like the happy endings, um, trying to be honest as a storyteller, sometimes that's the way we express it.
yeah.
Is this guy is the good guy who should have gone home, but he didn't, and
It-
and everybody knows that guy, or knows the guy who knows that guy in real life.
Yeah, and like I said, there's and that's one thing I was going to mention tonight because you guys definitely don't mind killing off some characters if it suits the story. If it
Sure.
if it fits in there, everybody's game. If it makes the story,
Right.
and it's never done for anything that's needless, and that's one of the cool things about it.
Yeah, we don't want to get, and we've talked, and we would warn ourselves against that. We would say, we can't get into this Walking Dead, Game of Thrones kind of snuff film type thing where
Yeah,
the only appeal is who's going to die, who lives, who dies. Ultimately, we wanted to tell a story, but we wanted, we wanted the cost of war to be there, and
yeah.
and not go, the GI Joe route where, you know,
Everybody shoots, no one dies, and they all
yeah,
walk away.
exactly,
Um,
exactly. Right.
and
Blow up a few robots, call it a day.
yeah, and Kentucky Squirrel mentioned Exo's death too. That was another hard one because
Yeah.
Exo was a solid character.
Yeah.
Um,
I liked Exo a lot. And he had died in the first draft of Legionnaire, actually. Um,
mm,
and my wife was reading that. She was an English lit major. And so she was kind of editing that book for me while I was writing it. And she was like, "You cannot kill Exo." Like, no, you cannot kill Exo. Don't kill him. So I didn't. And that was a good mistake. She was right. But in the very first draft, Chun was like the only one really who for sure got off, and Ford was kind of maybe, but everybody else was pretty much out of there. Everyone else was dead.
oh man, so 20s went down,
Yeah,
Exo went down. Oh
yeah,
man, yeah, that
yeah,
pretty much wiped out the crew.
yeah. It was a lot bleaker of an ending. The first one for sure. The
Yeah,
the first draft was much bleaker.
yeah, like in Legionnaire when you're looking at that,
Hmm.
basically the last battle before
Uh-huh.
they get out of Kublar.
Hmm.
Is there like a battle that you know from history or something that happened you kind of compare that to and write off of?
I couldn't, not even necessarily like a historical battle. I had a friend named Chris Kagawa who was in Afghanistan, and even now it's escaping me. But basically, he had one of those situations where, the hills are full of the Taliban.
Yeah,
There's a scene where, Chun has to use his tomahawk. That's because Chris had to use his tomahawk. They were that close. They called in air support and danger close, and just boom, getting your clothes ripped off of you from the overpressure. And so basically, I thought, well, I want to take that kind of climactic battle that just, you know, Zulu, kind of like the old Zulu movie, but just
yeah,
it's just all right. This is it, Alamo, Last Stand. So kind of an amalgam of those battles which repeat throughout history, and just kind of just trust the reader to say, all right, tactically, who knows, but this scenario, this Last Stand, yeah, we've seen this before in history, and here we are again.
yeah. Before I forget about it, because there are some guys in here I know that haven't read the books or haven't listened to the books. Can we kind of explain the origins of the Legion,
Mhm.
their kind of purpose, and then like dark ops off of them? Because it seems, and correct me if I'm wrong, it seems like the Legion's kind of a ranger type setup, and then Black Ops is more of the, you know, Green Beret SOG type.
Yeah. So what we kind of came up with was this idea that because it's science fiction and you've got a huge galaxy, you can essentially make the Rangers, but you can have them so elite that just to be a Ranger at this point is putting you in the top 1% of 1% of 1%. Like
Yeah.
these are full on, like you put them in any other venue, you make them athletes, they're the best athletes. You know, they're just the best, the cream of humanity, and they get funneled into this warfighting program called the Legion. And so because their skill set is so high, they're all sort of automatically special forces qualified. Like no
Yeah.
one's worried that these guys aren't going to pass selection or anything like that. And so then it's just a matter of picking the guys who are best suited for the particular job. And so Doc Spears, who was a Green Beret, he kind of helped establish, you know, the role of Dark Ops, which kind of like you know, American Special Forces, where the Green Berets are doing different work than direct action.
Yeah.
We had that part, but then we were also kind of looking at how during the GWAT, like a lot of Special Forces started to get used for direct action. You know, you always hear the stories of Navy SEALs just getting inserted, you know, just going and doing this, doing that. And so as Special Forces kind of become an easy button, it just gets used more and more. And so we kind of developed the idea that, you know, the Legionnaires are the Rangers, Special Forces were a Green Beret style Special Forces, but because they were used so effectively, they end up being inserted for all kinds of direct action missions. And so our main characters with that Chun and that kill team are essentially put into direct action and are never really doing the you know, the subterfuge, never really doing the coalition building or the
Yeah.
training, some of the other things that the Green Berets do. They're just, you know, throw us in the streets, we'll kidnap this guy, and then we're out. You know, just they're that guy. They're you know, kind of like what Delta was doing in Iraq. Just
Yeah.
who do we need? Let's roll them up. Okay, let's go. What house needs to be killed? All right, let's go kill this house. Just that kind of a job. So but the idea behind the Legionnaires were, it's dumb that in Star Wars the stormtroopers are supposed to be the elite soldiers and they're like the worst on the screen, right? Like they,
Yeah.
you know, like
Can't hit nothing.
anything. They tactically they just run, stand, you know, kind of like a Revolutionary War firing line, but less effective than that even. So part of it was just, let's look at what Space Marines, you know, actual shock troopers can do for real if they have good tactics and training and a warrior mentality.
Yeah, and it really works into the rest of it because you've got, you know, the Republic Army, the basics. You've got basically the Navy, the Space Forces, the pilots. I mean, the books are so layered when you get into a lot of it, where you've got the air combat going on or space combat, depending on whether they're in atmosphere or out of atmosphere.
Right. Yeah.
You know, you got basics driving the sleds. I mean, it's just amazing the way you get all of that to fit.
Thank you.
Like when McRaven takes off with the guys in the who is it? He called the other guy Snack Shack and threw him up driving the sled. And what was the line when someone like McRaven gives you a nickname, you tattoo it on your soul? It was something
Right.
like that. It's
Yeah. Yeah.
hysterical. But
Yeah.
yeah,
I mean, a lot of that we steal now. Like, you know, someone like Walt Robillard will tell us something, and you know, Nick or I, oh, stealing that. You know, like you know, you get the privilege of being around some guys, and they've got a creative way of saying things, and you say, hey, just so you know, full disclosure, that's getting put in the book. So.
oh yeah. And the lines from McRaven a lot of times are just, I mean, if you wanted an old school sergeant major, that's it right there all day long.
Right.
It's just great. That's probably what took me out when he went. It was just like, nah, you can't kill him.
Right.
but
Yeah. And
but
yet,
it
like, you know,
fit for
like
the
you said, those
story.
old school sergeant majors, they're a dying breed.
Yeah, they are. Um, they definitely are. And then we talked about So it kind of getting back to explaining the Legion. So the Legion was created strictly to really fight the savages.
Right.
And can you kind of explain how that came about?
Sure. Yeah.
Because you can do it way better than I can.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah. So we had the idea. We planted the seed of the Savage Wars, and that was another Star Wars thing. Like people who didn't grow up with just that original trilogy of movies, they don't know how much we kind of would geek out and think about what was this really like, right? So
Yeah.
when Luke Skywalker is telling Obi-Wan Kenobi that his father didn't fight in the Clone Wars, and that's all you get is there's this thing called the Clone Wars. I mean, there was so much thought and creativity among fans, kind of nerdily arguing or dreaming. Well, what was that like? What was a Clone War like? We didn't have a prequels to show us all that stuff, so it was this intriguing idea, and so we said, hey, we should do that. We should have everyone mention this great conflict, and because it's just part of that world, you treat it the way we might say, oh yeah, like it's just like Vietnam, right?
Yeah.
Well, if we fast forward 2,000 years into the future and someone's like, yeah, it's like Vietnam, the context is gone. You can tell that they know what they're talking about, but you have no idea. And so we did that with the Savage Wars, and that's why I think people wanted to see that book. So the concept of the Savage Wars was on Earth, real Earth. We had the Elon Musks and the Jeff Bezoses and those types kind of see, all right, we've irrevocably ruined this planet, but we don't have to stay here and deal with the consequences. So we're just going to go ahead and get on what they called light huggers, and we're going to go off and we're going to find new worlds. But also, it gave them the freedom to kind of experiment with post-humanism and say, if we're unshackled from law and government and morality, and we can pursue whatever utopian ideals we've installed on ourselves, what happens? Well, Nick and I feel like what happens is you become monsters. You become some kind of monstrous thing. Like the guy who's trying to live forever or live to be 200 and vampiring his kid's blood and doing all that kind of stuff, right? All right, well, you put that guy on a ship with unlimited resources, devoted acolytes, and nothing but experimentation, or you put, a Goebbels or someone like that on that kind of a ship.
Yeah.
What's coming out on the other side is going to be pretty horrific. And that was the concept. When these ships come back into the galactic stage, they're coming back with absolute nightmare fuel. They're militaristic, they're savage, and they're raiding for technology, they're raiding for food, they're raiding for people, all that sort of stuff. And they're really good at it. And humanity's kind of caught unawares, except for one character, Tyrus Rex, who is convinced by a friend of his that the only way to stop these guys is to make more Tyrus Rexes. And so they form the Legion and have a very difficult selection. And so they create this sort of warrior culture, this sort of Spartan last stand culture.
Yeah.
Say, these are the guys who we are going to have that are going to go and fight against every odd, fight to the death, and go down thinking, how can I kill more people before my lights go out? And so they end up fighting and winning the Savage Wars as that Legion grows. And then the mythos behind the Republic is that, the Legion needs support. It can't just exist as a military unit forever. And so they form the Republic. But in this particular government, the Legion is not a branch of government, but it's sort of given this independent watchdog status where the Legion is funded by the government. The Legion agrees to protect the government, but the Legion also sort of reserves the right to step in and intervene if the government loses its principles and becomes corrupt, which it ultimately does. But that was another thing we like to explore. How many times have people said something like, oh man, there's got to be another revolution, or, this isn't working, or this corruption's just too much. We say it's just too much for a long time, but an actual civil war is not something that people want. So it ends up being, well, a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. And hopefully now we're at a point where those things are going to be resolved peacefully and, and everything along those lines. But it was looking into, all right, well, how far can the corruption and the rot really go? Because that was an open question when Nick and I were first writing the series, to the point where a lot of people thought, oh, it's not that bad. You're being melodramatic. It's not that bad. Yeah.
We hear that now. Oh,
Yeah.
it's not
Yeah.
that. It's just $1 billion here.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm. Yeah. It's just the appearance and the opportunity for fraud. That doesn't for fraud. That's not actual fraud. And then it becomes fraud. And it's only a little fraud, like you said, $1 billion here. Who cares? Um, yeah. And so that's basically the story of the Legion, though. So then, as the book goes on, they exercise their sort of constitutional right, which we called Article 19,
Yep.
to reset the government. Um, and what we started exploring here in the third season, the final act is, um, do you actually get to do a full reset, or is what ends up coming a totally different set of circumstances? Essentially, you can't go back home.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that's a valid thing to look at and to think about. If there's a second American Civil War, what actually happens to America? And I would argue that it's whatever it is, it's not the America that we once knew. It's something
Yeah.
new and different in ways that we won't be able to predict fully.
Well, it's like in the books, even though Article 19 happened, they still couldn't get, especially some people just did it on their own, but some people were the Mandarins, and they still had influence over everything even after 19.
Right. Yeah.
And it's just, could you get them all out? And
Yeah.
in the books, of course, they tried.
Mhm.
God knows Goss Solis gave it the old
Right.
college try,
Yeah.
but
Right.
even he didn't get everybody.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And he had to do it through, a mass extermination and
Yeah.
and essentially, I'm going to purge evil by becoming evil because it's the only way. But that's just more thematic elements. But that it's an inclination that we have. That's the I mean that was the terrors of the French Revolution. Hey, we're going to get rid of this by turning up to this level, which then gets turned up to that level, and then you have something that's far worse than what you were overthrowing.
Yeah. I mean, if you, it's kind of that, humans are always going to be that corruptible.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
I mean, everybody's got their ideals, and you could tell the ideals in the books from the characters and
Hmm.
what they wanted to do. But ultimately, humans are going to be human. They want that power.
Right.
Um, for the most part, there are some that don't. If you looked at Keel, you looked at a bunch of other guys, they didn't want that power. They
Hmm.
wanted to
Right.
live their lives. They wanted to be left alone. Um, but they couldn't be left alone.
Right.
No.
Yeah. It's what the Lord of the Rings does so well, right?
Mhm.
You have Frodo having the ring, but ultimately giving it up. Um, and then you have the people that say, no, I want that power. And that's something that Tolkien does very well, is really show us the human condition, and let's not blink at what we are. Right.
Yeah. And that's one of the great things about the books is they're completely believable for what people would do in any given situation, especially the savages. You give
Mhm.
them full reign over people. And for people who haven't heard me talk about it before, the Savage Light Huggers are massive ships with thousands of people,
Mhm.
but 99% of the people on there are just basically slaves. They're underlings.
Mhm.
So the handful on top in that situation, they just do whatever they want. They experiment on them,
Mhm.
use them for any kind of toy to fight, to do whatever with. Um, and it made a living hell for some of them, and it made absolute demons out of some, the more
Mhm.
powerful ones.
Right.
Um, whose idea was it when we talk about let's say the Savage Marines,
Mhm.
when you went to just brains and the mechanical body and the calorie hoarders? I mean, was that a kind of a group right, or did someone go, nah, we need to do it this way?
Yeah, no, that I mean, um, it was Nick came up with that for sure. We have a very collaborative writing style, and we base it on improv. And one of the principles of improv is if you're up doing an improv show, and somebody says, "I've got a gun," right? You don't get to say, "No, no, no, you don't have a gun," and derail it. The whole
Yeah,
point
yeah.
is for you to improvise, and it's what we call a yes and. I have a gun, and then you go with it, right? You have a gun, but you don't have, but I'm behind a bulletproof glass. You just keep going. You don't say you
Yeah.
don't get to do that. So with that, Nick was sort of like, hey, I want to do this. And it's like, okay, great, let's do that. And let's just open it up so that we can have a strain. So that's what opened it up, the idea of there being like kind of a strain of savages who
Yeah.
were sort of pulling the strings for all the others. Those are all things that kind of organically happened as we continued to build, because he had an idea of what he wanted to do with the brain in the jar and the kind of living in a video game in a virtual reality type scenario.
Yeah.
I had some ideas of what I wanted to do, and so we're like, okay, how do we make both those ideas work? And that's the result that you got there.
Because in one of your after action reports, you guys were talking about not necessarily the character, but how you did these different races of aliens. And either you or Nick said it kind of started out as a joke for some, and then it was like, well, no, maybe we can work that. This needs to fit here, and that's how you came up with the donks. And it's awesome in your after action reports to listen to you guys together.
Sure. Thank you. Yeah.
It's
We hope that those would be enjoyable for people. We're like, well, let's give them a little bit of a peek behind the curtain, since we get these questions a lot.
Yeah, and it's great getting that peek behind the curtain, because it's
Good.
just it's so wild to look at the universe, the galaxy you guys built around these books. Listening to this, to the Savage Wars, and getting some of the background on how things happened, the Great Uplift, and what people did before they left the Earth, and the colony ships, and what was done to Tyrus Rex and Sulla, and Reyna. It's amazing the lore you guys have built into everything, and you guys do it.
I think we pushed out all of our Star Wars and Star Trek lore when we realized that was now irrelevant, and we replaced it with Galaxy's Edge. But I'm getting older now. Now there's some guys. We have a group in our Wargate production channel. Our Legion archivists, who are some people that have just an encyclopedic knowledge of these books. And so there's times where I'll say, I think I remember this guy, but I better ask these guys, because I don't want to miss some key component, and then it's a major plot point and the whole thing gets scrapped.
Yeah, because you guys do an awesome job of sticking with the canon that you've built. Everything really fits in as the characters progress. It didn't all of a sudden this person does something crazy that, hey, that never happened in that book or that series of books heading up to it. So everything's really based and flows real nice.
Yeah, and that's the one exception to the yes and rule that we have, is if someone comes up with a story idea, it doesn't matter how much they love it or how good of an idea is. If we can say this doesn't fit the universe because of X, Y, or Z, then it just has to go. It can't happen. So there's no retconning. There's been times where we've had discussions about, oh, well, is there a way to bring Tyrus Rex back from the dead as an alternate Tyrus Rex? And it's like, no, we've established this and we've established that, and we didn't leave the opening. And so we're not going to say secretly, while nobody was looking, this happened. That's not, every time we've done any kind of a swerve, we've had, we specifically leave it open, kind of like, if you don't see a body, there's a chance they'll come back. That's kind of been our rule. If you don't see a body, then that gives us the right to bring them back. If they have specific special abilities that we've talked about, then we can exploit those specific special abilities. But when a guy like Exo dies, he's dead.
He's out.
There's not an Exo factory where they, let's put in Exo 2, let's anything like that.
So there's a chance Wildman's still out there somewhere then.
Yeah,
because we never saw his body.
Because we didn't actually. So there's a written non-canon scene, which is Wildman's last stand, which got cut from the book. But people seem to be liking the idea that he can survive. So I was like, well, we can just rewrite this and get this guy to safety at some point. Because one thing we do want to do as things go on is just not charge for it, not do an annotated double-sized edition, but just kind of say, okay, here are the stories that we had to cut. And these were cut during the editing process, so they're rough. They're not like fully fleshed out like book where I just say, oh, here, you can see it today. But what happened to Jack? What happened to the Wild Man? All those
Yeah.
things had answers, but it was like, well, only this many hours can be recorded. So, all right, well, how are we going to make this work? Because KTF was supposed to be one book to kind of end that, just
Yeah.
one big 30-hour book at least. And so then it was, well, can't do it all at once. Got to split it up into two, all that kind of thing. So that's why it's KTF 1 and KTF 2.
Yeah, I heard you guys talk about it in one of the after action reports.
Mhm.
Because RC, he just on his schedule, there's no way he could have done the 30 hours worth of book.
Yeah. So he has at the time, and I think he still does. He's essentially got a it's like the old Hollywood studio system. So he works for a specific publisher, and his hours and his availability are kind of under their control.
Yeah.
And at that time, they were having him on a lot of projects. And then when he got some health issues, that really set back his ability to even do that. And it's only gotten progressively worse from there,
Oh
to the
man.
point where it's like now, he's off the series because he can't do it. I think about the only thing he's doing is Craig Allen's and stuff, and then occasionally another book here or there. But yeah, it's the downside to audio, because people
Yeah,
really
it is.
fall in love with the narrator. But like one of our books, Wayward Earth, people have enjoyed that book. We put it as the seventh book in Wayward Galaxy. That
Mhm.
was initially going to be a total standalone series with 3 or 4 books we had planned, and just like a prequel series. And then it sits with the publisher, and it sits with the publisher, and we say, hey, what's going on? Like what's going on with this? And it's like, well, we don't think RC Bray is going to be able to record this. And we're like, oh, you can't tell us that now. There's not somebody that we can have do the voice of Brody except for RC Bray.
Yeah.
And so I was like, can you at least see if you can get him to read the Brody lines, and then get someone who's a good talent like Mark Boyette to do the rest? And they're like, yeah, we can do that, but just for this one. So we're like, all right, well, in that case, let's just put it at the end of Wayward Galaxy and just call it a day. Which is too bad, because I really liked that book. I like that character.
Yeah.
I enjoyed writing it, but this is the nature of that sort of thing. And so until RC, Robot Bray, digital RC Bray comes out, and they find a way to use AI to make his voice, which I feel like is where a lot of this is going to end up going with
Yeah.
these narrators,
Quite
because
possibly.
you have so many narrators that they are an audience to themselves, and some of them, they've signed NDAs, but if you are savvy and you have the ear, you can go on Apple Books and you can listen to their generic AI narration, and it's some top level narrators who have, they have plausible deniability, but there's some guys and gals who have already licensed their voice, and I think that's going to happen more and more. And unfortunately, this whole industry is going to move to a place where you're probably going to have a digitized voice that sounds like RC Bray or sounds like someone you like, that's then going to be directed by a technician, and then it'll just reach the point where you want RC Bray to read every book, subscribe to RC Bray, or just subscribe to it. But
Yeah.
that's what's going to happen. That's where we're headed, which
Yeah.
is too
Because
bad, because there's some really good
RC Bray
talent,
was,
there's
yeah,
upcoming talent.
he's an absolute monster when it comes to talent. I
Oh
mean, the
yeah.
way he voiced characters
Hmm.
is just crazy good.
Yeah.
Um, that was a hard thing about Wanted. As good as that book was
Hmm.
losing, Chun's voice and stuff, and
Right.
it was still an awesome book. Don't get me wrong, but it was hard to go to another narrator once you got hooked on those particular voices and personality kind of quirks for a character.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's brutal, and as authors, we absolutely hate that when it happens, because you know, part of the reason that we went back with the publisher we were at, is because RC Bray had an exclusivity contract with them, and we heard from the listeners, they were like, "Hey, Takeover, that's fine." When Ray Porter did Takeover, like he's
Yeah,
good. It wasn't really the same character, so it didn't hurt too much. But it was like, I don't want to listen to Galaxy's Edge if he can't be there. So we said, all right, we'll frankly, we'll take the pay cut to get RC Bray for the fans. So we did that, and thankfully we got all of season 2 done, albeit not as robust as we wanted it.
yeah,
But then same thing, season 3, that was that was kind of turned in about the same time as Wayward Earth, and it was like, we are going to need to pare down his titles, and we feel like Galaxy's Edge is strong enough that people will still listen without him, so we're going to
Oh
cut
yeah.
Galaxy's Edge. And we're just like, they're like, you can go publish it yourself if you want. And we're like, well, at this point, we like Mark Boyette. He's an excellent narrator in his own right.
Yeah.
He did Order of the Centurion, and did a fantastic job on that audiobook. And I think that's one of the reasons his performance is one of the reasons why that one was nominated for a Dragon Award. But yeah, so we're like, all right, well, we're not going to be able to get him. He's exclusive, so we can't get him by going and doing it ourselves. So let's just finish this out. But it stinks. It stinks because, like, while there are people like you that understand, there are plenty more people who think that Nick and I are personally picking our narrator, and we're saying, no, we don't want R.C. Bray. And it's like we have no control. It's just like, if Amazon takes over James Bond and they put a terrible actor, that's, you can't blame Sean Connery for that. Like, it's totally out of his control. He's dead.
Yeah, there's no way, and I'm sure you guys do catch hell over it. I mean, you can't account for everything. No, you really can't. Yeah. Life's life, baby. It comes at you, and things happen.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the things about y'all's books, though. They're so well written. I mean, honestly, there's one or two books, and I can't remember which one offhand, where the book wasn't all that good, but R.C. Bray's narration made the book.
Mm-hmm.
With you guys' books are pretty well stand up on their own. So, changing out to another narrator, it hurts because then, the voices changed.
Right.
Some of the inflection in the character changes because the voice changes. But the books themselves are so good, you'll get used to another person reading the book because the book can stand on its own.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And that just speaks to the need to put your best in whatever you do. As much as you control, put in your very best work. And that's something that we always try to do. But it has made us, as we do new series, it has made us kind of say, well, if we're casting and certain narrators are offered, do we want to take that narrator? Because if it's going to be a situation where one book or two books come and then we hear not doing it anymore, well, at that point, I'd rather just give a different narrator the reins, knowing that they're going to be able to finish it. We're running into that. J.N. Chaney and I have a series called Able-Bodied Soldier right now. And so R.C. Bray was able to do the first two books, and I think he's going to be able to do the third. But then it was sort of like, well, after that, probably not. And we're like, well, great. So we're going to do 3, and then 4, 5, and 6 are going to be someone else. And it's it's kind of that here we go again type situation. But it's out of your hands. And when it's coming, there's little tricks you can do as a writer, introduce new perspectives so that you're getting a new character's voice. That will sound natural, more than the unnatural voice that is being replaced. But that's the audiobook rumble. It's one of the reasons why we haven't done a Kill Team Ice and a Savage Wars, is because Audible Studios has been, they want to get Stephen Lang back, but they're not sure, and we've kind of been like, well, when you're sure, let us know and we can do this. But otherwise, because we can do that.
We are definitely dying for more Savage Wars for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's like a lot of the other books. There's so many places you can go with that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, one of the sections of the book talked about Tyrus Rex being trapped somewhere, and I think for a year all he had was one of the torches to fight the savages with. And that to me, that could be a massive book just on its own. Talking about that kind of fighting on whatever planet and fighting whichever savages. And the savages are so good and had so many different types where you'd never know what he'd be looking at.
Right. Well, I mean, I can just tell you there are so many partial works and ideas in Galaxy's Edge that will come to light eventually. But Nick has got he has a project that he's been working on that kind of follows the Prometheus character and sort of has him hiding inside of a savage sort of mainframe, trying to stay ahead of forces that are seeking to shut it down during the Savage Wars, and it's just a wild trip. But it's sort of like, well, what are we going to do with this? Like, like this is really interesting and it's a great story, but does anyone want to read it other than us when we wrote it? And so that's what we're looking forward to is just to be able to say, all right, let's set this up with Wargate operators, with Galaxy's Edge insiders, and just sell it on our website and say, hey, if you want this, here it is. Produce the audiobooks ourselves, do things like that, and then just try to just say, what else do you want? What else you got? Let's explore this together.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, like when McAfee goes into the Strand the first time, he comes out known as the Dirty Wizard,
right?
But he was there for what, a couple hundred years in that time, and that could be an absolute story on its own, just with McAfee's crazy self running around, trying to make his way through the Strand.
It's actually in that vein. The first one that we called it Into the Unknown, and we even had Earl Otis, who is an old Dungeons and Dragons, kind of like those psychedelic, some of those old early Dungeons and Dragons art pieces that were a little bit more, this guy is probably recreationally taking mushrooms before he starts painting. So we hired him and we said, hey, give us something weird, and he delivered. But it's just sitting on the Wargate archives, just sitting there waiting for its time.
Well, you guys definitely have, and in all of your books definitely have books and books upon books of content you guys could do with those characters, because again, it gets back to they're so well written.
Thank you.
I do have to ask, how many 80s movies did you have to watch to come up with Brody's lines?
Oh man. At first it was all from memory. Because like I said, I watched a lot of movies. But then it's like, you don't just want to say get to the choppa over and over again.
Yeah.
So I was like, well, now I'm gonna have to go back and start doing this. So I actually have like this big 4K library. It says Brody's Library, and there's a couple of tapes in there, but it's this. I watched a lot of movies. That's why it was so fun. That, like I said, is a dream job. What other job can I go? I need the 4K edition of Demolition Man for work, and then I can go and I can get it. I can watch it, and it's all totally legit, right? Like it sounds made up, but yeah, just there's a lot. I think I've rewatched every Chuck Norris movie. Some are definitely better than others. Just gone through the gamut of action movies from the 80s and early 90s. But I mean, it's fun. Like, I'm not complaining. Like I've seen them all once, and so some of them have held up pretty well. Some of them you're like, oh,
not so much. They're straight up 80s. He's another character, man, that's just an absolute blast. And especially getting RC Bray voicing him was just hysterical.
He did a great job, and we weren't sure how well when I gave him the stutter, I was like, I wonder how he's going to pull this off. And whether it was the producer or whether it was him directly, he pulled off that stutter so that it sounded like that Max Headroom, because that was the concept, was like, hey, let's make Max Headroom a superhero in his speech patterns, and give him a little bit of Ash from Evil Dead. And I talked with RC Bray about it, and he just nailed it so perfectly. It's amazing.
It really is. And again, getting to his voice and you guys' writing, it's an insanely good combination.
It's great, and we've been really fortunate. I mean, we've had some narrators that have been assigned on some books which they did not do it justice. Like, their idea of like, oh, I'm playing a soldier, all right, I'll talk like this all the time, and you're just like, oh, this is bad, like turn this down. We've had a couple of audiobooks like that, but for the most part, we've had some really good talent. Christopher Ryan Grant, who does the Forgotten Rune books, he talks slow, but he can nail some voices.
He can.
That military fantasy genre. We're excited to be able to do more work with Clifton Duncan, who did a book called Underspire for us.
Yeah, that was excellent.
And he's a classically trained actor. I mean, this guy was like destined for Broadway stardom, but he had the audacity of speaking out against some of the COVID restrictions, and that is a death sentence in New York theater culture. And so it kind of derailed his career, but you know, to our benefit, because now we're getting this like extremely talented actor performing some of our books. He's going to be performing our upcoming title, Wreck Jumpers. So yeah, and then Mark Boyette always puts in solid performances every time he does anything. So we've been real blessed to have good narrators. But thing is, there's new narrators coming up. There's a Galaxy's Edge fan named Adam Hartswick who is starting up his narration, and we're hopeful to put him on a project because he's got a great voice and seems to have an instinct for it. So that's the shame if it goes to AI, because there are some talented human beings who can deliver performances like R.C. Bray. But I'm worried that we're just going to end up with a drop-down list of 15 voices, like, you know, pick your favorite Siri voice, and that's all you get. And that would be a shame.
Yeah, that'll be an absolute shame. It really will. It'll be easier to get the person or the voice that you want for something, but losing the person that's actually doing it, yeah, that's going to hurt if it does come down to that. That takes that human element out of it, that art from it. So all the art's just gone. It's all plug and play at that point.
Yeah, and I just don't know that you can capture the spark that makes it work. You know, you ever see like the old audition tapes for Star Wars? I think there's one where they have Kurt Russell audition for Han Solo or Luke or something like that, and it's not even bad. It's actually really good, but it immediately is such a different vibe and character because of the energy that Kurt Russell brings to the project versus Harrison Ford. That you're just like, well, this is what might have been. And I think audiobooks can be the same way.
Yeah, I think they absolutely can. And it's that human touch, taking these characters off a page and making them into this living, breathing, almost real person. When you're listening to them, it's amazing. It really is.
Yeah, it's a far cry from the first books on tape, where it was just
God,
one guy just reading a book,
monotone all the way.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's when I got into listening to the Galaxy's Edge. Like I said, a buddy of mine recommended you guys, and I can't remember whether that was the first time I listened to R.C. Bray. I may have been on another book where I heard him, but getting hooked on you guys' writing and R.C. Bray, you get to scratching like a meth head out here thinking about where's my next book? Where's my next book? Be standing on the corner. I need me some Galaxy's Edge, man.
Yeah, I mean that's part of the marketing aspect of it too. Is if we love it and we can make it entertaining for people, that's the hope that they will want to keep coming back to it. So and we've been blessed that people have.
Oh man, I blame my buddy all the time. I'm a complete addict for you guys' material.
Well, I thank you for being an addict, and we'll keep being your dealer as long as you let us.
Oh, please do, because I think I've got a couple of the Order of Centurion books that I haven't listened to yet. But other than that, the Dark Operator, Savage Wars, mainline, mainline series, my Audible library is loaded with you guys. And then Forgotten Ruins, another one. I'm jonesing for the next book there.
Yeah, and that's just for like the way we look at it is that's just scratching the surface. Like we don't want to stop working in those. We're going to expand. We're going to do Delta Kings in the Forgotten Ruins series after we wrap up Sergeant Thor. Like I was saying, that's what I was writing earlier today with some Sergeant Thor. That's just part of what we're doing. Nick and I are looking at some other like totally new series, just to scratch the itch and keep creating and keep writing. We try to take a blue collar approach. If you've got a plumbing business, you're in the truck every day and you're going and you're getting to work and you're doing it. And so we don't, just because our keyboard is our tool set, we don't have the attitude that gives you license to just, hang out on the beach all day long. We like to get to work.
And one of your after action reports, you talked about that. It was like treating it like an actual job. You get up in the morning, may take care of a few things, then it's writing time. And you write that day. And it's really cool. How do you and Nick kind of handle passing the material back and forth?
Yeah, that's a good question. We've done it a lot of different ways over the years, and experimented with a lot of different things. There were time early on we would assign character arcs to each other. So it would be
Uh,
like, all right, you're going to write, like I mentioned earlier, you write the Keel and Robbie sections, I'll write the Tyrus Rex sections, and then you take over and you meld it together. So we did that with Galactic Outlaws with Kill Team. He wrote like the Tom sections, and that was a trip when I first saw those come in. And it's I'm just reading it. It's you're Tom, you're this, you're that. I'm like,
yeah,
okay, but it's we don't say no, we just go. And I did the Kill Team Victory sections. But what that ended up doing was we'd have two good stories, but then it would take a lot of additional work to get them to feather in
yeah,
and make the book feel like it was flowing well. Because when you're writing yourself, you are naturally having the cliffhangers, the highs, the lows, the rest chapters, the breaks, the pinch points, all those little writing things. But when it's two totally built things and you've got to now figure out how to build it into one book, we were like, well, this is taking more time than one of us just writing it start to finish, and then the other one taking that first draft and adding their ideas into it and then synthesizing that. So now we do it more like that way. We'll get together and we'll say, okay, it's sort of like a television writer's room.
yeah,
There'll
yeah.
be a lead writer and it says, this is the episode, this is the book, this is what's happening. And then that lead writer will either write it themselves, kind of start to finish, or hey, I need this aside. We're going to explore this character. Will you do that? And then the other writer will come in and sort of give it its touch ups and go from there. So that's what we've done more as of late. And I think that you can probably see it in the style because Nick has a much more kind of wordy, descriptive, kind of like meandering style where
Yeah.
the sentence, you never quite know where the sentence is going to end. And I do my best to emulate that when I write in Forgotten Ruin or Sergeant Thor. My writing tends to be a bit more punchy, like shorter sentences and quick and rapid. And so I think those who can kind of identify the difference can kind of say, okay, Nick was the lead writer on this, or Jason was the lead writer on that. But at the end of the day, we're bringing it back together and making sure it fits on a unified track, and both having the opportunity to put our voice and put our scenes into play and things like that.
So Nick's more like Talker from Forgotten Ruin, but with a
Yeah.
sandwich instead of coffee.
Nick is Talker. Yeah, he
Yeah.
is. He is absolutely Talker. Yeah, exactly.
I was going to ask about him too because he's just another one of those characters. It's just he's amazing to follow through the books.
Right. Yeah.
I still like when he had to shoot the government guy. That was just hysterical.
And that was actually one of my favorite. That was one of my favorite chapters in that first book. Is I can't remember which chapter it is, but the chapter starts and it just says, "I told you, warts and all," and then the chapter's over and you go to the next chapter. That was one of my favorite chapters. I like when we were able to do things like that.
Yeah, and Forgotten Ruins another book with another strong sergeant major.
Mm-hmm.
And just seriously no nonsense. This is what we got to do.
Yeah.
I mean, I couldn't imagine him and a couple other guys from Galaxy's Edge kind of being in the same book running things. That would just be
that's the crossover that you do wonder about sometimes. Yeah.
that would be rough. Him and Mac, and then oh God, what's his name? The General Hannibal and a couple others that were just
Sure.
out there stone cold killers getting together. Nothing would be safe.
No, nothing would. Yeah, they take care of the savages fine, I'm sure.
Oh yeah. Matter of fact, Johnny Green, the guy, he just came in chat. He's the guy who got me hooked on you guys.
Oh, cool.
What are you doing,
Johnny,
Mama?
thank you.
Sorry, my son just walked in. Hey, go to Mama. Hey, go check Mama. Sorry, my 5-year-old come running in.
Hey, I know what that's like. I know what that's like. I think one of mine was playing the piano upstairs. I had to text and be like, hey, on the show. Like, let's make sure
they'll go up. Yeah, they'll come in here and bail on me all the time when I'm doing stuff, which is great. I mean, I love them. They've been on streams plenty of times.
Yeah,
just hanging out.
All good. All good.
Absolutely a hoot. Mm-hmm. Hey, Green, do you have anything you wanted to ask? Because I'll probably let Jason go here in a couple minutes. I don't want to hold him all night. Because Johnny Green was telling me he found you guys, I think, on Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
He was looking for he had finished out a bunch of Star Wars stuff, and the new Star Wars stuff was just horrible. And he was looking for another series, and he said he was hooked on it. The first line in Legionnaire, the galaxy's a dumpster fire.
Yeah.
He said, "Yep." Push play on that, and then it was off to the races. Which then he turned around and did it to me.
That just like that was a line that I'll take credit for that line. I don't know what I was doing. I just popped into my head, and because like I said, we were writing Galactic Outlaws first. That was the first book in Galaxy's Edge, and we were like, okay, we're gonna have these Legionnaires, and I just was thinking about the Legionnaires. And I just started typing that, and then that line led to the next line, led to the next line, and so then before I knew it, I had that kind of initial monologue where he's explaining how the Republic works and what they want and what his worry is, and I was like, hey, Nick, I kind of want to take a break from my stuff if that's all right, and work on this because I feel like it's something. And he was like, yeah, go for it, because at the time, we were definitely in nothing left to lose. Like I had 3 so-so books, like I mentioned. Nick had just lost his contract with HarperCollins because he wouldn't do what the editor wanted, which was accept censorship. And so, it's not like we were like, oh, you can't pause on the greatest success of our careers. We were just like, yeah, whatever, who cares? Like, it'll probably burn out, who knows? But as we went, it just kept getting better and better. And then we started releasing Legionnaire in chapters after I had gotten pretty close to after I'd finished it, and people were just raving about it.
Oh,
so Nick was like, hey, let's make this book 1 and let's get it out there, and we did, and the rest is history.
Yeah, and I mean it's an awesome book. If you were someone starting out, talking to someone starting out new, watching the series or listening to the series or reading the series,
okay,
would you tell them to start out with Savage Wars and then work to Galaxy's Edge, the main storyline, or do like I did? You get
you
kind
can
of through the
definitely
main
do that. I mean, we
storyline.
wrote Savage Wars, like we kind of have it lined up with the books now. But when we first wrote it, we had the concept of we want different on ramps to the main highway that is Galaxy's Edge. So Savage Wars was meant to be that. Each Order of the Centurion book was meant to be that. So we tend to kind of ask people, if they do ask that question, it's like, what appeals most to you? And so for some people, Savage Wars is a great opening. I think you can't go wrong. We wrote that with it in mind. Legionnaire is some people's cup of tea and it's other people's cup of coffee, but other people just don't like it. Like it's just that's not what they want. They wanted Galactic Outlaws. So I think that's part of why that series worked, because people read Legionnaire and they're like, okay, but I'm not really into the combat stuff. And then they read Galactic Outlaws and they said, well, this I like. And then they got confused with Kill Team, horrified with Attack of Shadows. But at that point, they're sucked in. So it's too late.
Yeah, it was different because I listened to the main story for, I can't remember how many books. And then I kicked back and went to the Savage War. I think I had hit the point where in the books, Prometheus was kind of introduced, and then you'd see the stuff about the overlays, the games and stuff. Right. And I thought for a minute when I was listening to it, I was like, man, please tell me this isn't some kid just having a fever dream somewhere, playing a video game. Tell me this, this world exists.
Yeah.
And then I went back and listened to all the Savage Wars books, and it really built the story out.
Yeah, that does help. And that's partly why we moved them into season 1. We kind of realized that people who were listening to season 2 had not gotten the Savage Wars, probably because RC Bray wasn't recording it.
Yeah.
And it relies heavily on knowing what happens in the Savage Wars. So we kind of moved it over, and then it makes sense. But yeah.
If I was and Green, I think would disagree with me because he's just that way. He's a vet with brain trauma. I'm gonna blame it on that. But if I was going to recommend it to anybody, I'd recommend Savage Wars, all 3 books of Savage Wars, and then move into the main story. Because there's a lot of things that happen, especially going back through and listening to it. There's a lot of things that happen in the main story that make a hell of a lot more sense if you know about the Savages and how Tyrus Rex and everybody was trying to do things. And it just, to me, it flowed better going back through and listening to Savage Wars and then starting the main story over.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's an argument to be made, and I don't want to give any spoilers necessarily, although it's been 5+ years so at this point. But But then there's also things that happen in Savage Wars, which, you know, I think the end of book 2, there's kind of a reveal when you hear Sergeant Fast talk about, you know, what his real name is. And that's either a big surprise if you're familiar with the main series, or you're just like, well, who cares about that? You know, I don't care about that. You know, who cares? So it's hit or miss, but by design, it's designed to kind of be interesting and hopefully delightful, no matter what path you choose to take through it. So we don't really have a strong opinion of how you should read it.
Jason, we've been on almost an hour and a half. I got one more question for you, and then I'll let you get out of here, and then you can get back to writing juicy material for me. Get to work. And I just thought about it the other day. I was listening to, I can't remember which book, but could possibly Maestro and the sidebar be somewhat related?
Yeah, I think it's definitely possible. That idea of that kind of overarching entity, that mind that comes from somewhere.
Yeah.
We touched in season 2, the mission of the Deluvia, and kind of the odd circumstances which bring the Cybar kind of into being, so to speak.
Yeah.
And so for that to happen that way, you would assume that that Maestro, the Cybar, are, you know, they're coexisting at some point. And so I think that I think as a theory, that's a pretty good one. That you know, that's Maestro at work, kind of creating something which, if wielded properly, could have been a huge problem.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But anyway, Jason, I'll let you out of here, brother. Tell everybody again where they can find you. I put your Twitter and I put the War Game or the Wargate books link down in the description. But tell everybody where they can find you, where they can find the books and everything.
Yeah, I mean, those are the best spots where you can find you. You can go on Amazon and just search my name or search Galaxy's Edge, and you'll find those books. There is wargatebooks.com, and that's kind of our publisher Substack website. From there, you can find Nick's Substack, where he kind of does a little podcast, and you can also find my Substack, which is going to actually start to go live here this month, and I'm going to start sharing some first drafts. I heard from readers that they would like to see that. So I'm going to start sharing some first drafts and kind of go through the process of here's the first few chapters of this book. Here's what I would do next. Here's what I still have to do. But then I also want to do the reverse of what we're doing here. So I'll have you on my little podcast because, like I said earlier, I'm fascinated with the people who are on the other side of the page from me.
Yeah.
Like it's interesting to me to know, all right, how do we have this connection? What do we have in common? What are you passionate about? And so that's another thing there. So you can go to that Substack, which you can get to from wargatebooks.com and subscribe. And that's the easiest way to find me. And then also hear about new releases when they come.
Now, you made me think of another question.
Sure.
And then I'll let you at it. Do you carry a gun for self-protection?
Yes, I do.
What do you carry and how do you carry?
All right. So maybe I have too much. I'm not going to say too much money, but I get
With
really
7
bored.
kids, man, you need money.
Yeah. So like I like the P365 XL for most days. And then you're gonna have to forgive me for this, but like I for some reason am totally Glock dyslexic. Like the numbers, like beyond like 17, 19, like man, I don't know. Like I think like the 44 is the 22 LR, but I've got the compact 10 millimeter, which I like to carry when we're like doing a hike here in case of Bigfoot, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So those are the two I carry most often. In the winter, sometimes I'll carry like a full-size SIG because you got all your coats and things like that. But those 3 are the ones I usually go through. But man, I can talk myself into getting like, I'm like, oh, it'd be kind of cool to have like a 38 special in my pocket, not even have a holster, just the old man in the pocket, like, so it's like, I'm just not good for that. Like if you leave me unattended, I will have things that I don't need.
You will definitely get along with the crew that's out here now. Fluffy said, found on Amazon, start with Legionnaires. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, I mean, you
Legionnaires is
can
a
start
great
with
place to
Legionnaires by
start,
all
man.
means, but like what's been said, you might want to look for Savage Wars and start there. I think either way can't go wrong. But since this is your show, I say start with Savage Wars. You
Yeah,
gotta
that's
listen to the host.
yeah. I'd start with it. I mean, how many times do you get to see a guy nuke entire planets? I mean, come on.
Yeah, that's
Just
true.
roll up, drop a trigger nuke, walk out of it, and be like, "Yeah, we're done."
Right. Yeah.
All right, guys, let's get out of here. Jason, brother, I certainly appreciate it. I'm hoping I can finagle Nick one night and get to talk to Nick too.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Because like,
He'll do it.
and thank you guys for being so accessible, man. It's been awesome.
Oh man, I love it. I love it. Yeah, it's when I can make time for things like this, I love to do it. I never really interested in the big like, hey, let's talk about books because I'm a book producer type podcast. But
Yeah.
shows like this is what I like because this is like the actual readers and audience that we're sharing our interest in. So that's what I like to make time for.
Yeah, you definitely got a couple fans out in the audience in here, and you definitely got one on the screen. So,
Hey,
man, keep that writing up, baby. We're all over here shaking and jonesing, and we need some more Savage Wars.
yeah,
There's
right. Well, I'm not doing my job if I don't wear out the keyboard. So, got to
we'll
keep working at that.
Hey, you got 7 kids, man. You got to make that money too.
Yeah, that's right.
7.
That's 7 kids. That's true. 4 of them are girls too. So that's 4 weddings, man. That's
Oh, dude, man, you're gonna be
yeah.
hurting.
It's gonna be rough. It's gonna be real rough.
All right, guys, let's get out of here, and we will see you guys after a while. Thanks for showing up, Perps.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jason.